The morning light over the palace grounds shimmered through a thin veil of mist, softening the sharp lines of the ancient stone walls and gilded gates. For royal guard, Captain Rowan Alden, the quiet hour before the palace stirred was often the only moment when the world felt still, unnaturally still, as though holding its breath before the next storm. His polished boots pressed into the gravel path with a steady rhythm, each footstep echoing against the vast courtyard. The uniform hugged his shoulders, crisp and immaculate, the crimson sash across his chest representing 3 generations of service. His grandfather had guarded the late Queen. His father had guarded King Charles in his earlier years, and Rowan now bore the responsibility of guarding all who lived and breathed within these walls. He paused beneath the archway leading into the east wing, watching the sunlight creep across the tapestries lining the corridor. Every thread in the woven scenes, royal hunts, coronations, battles long past, seemed to whisper stories only those born into duty could hear. The palace was alive in its own way. The air held the faint scent of lavender wax used on the banisters. A draft swept through the hallway, lifting the corner of a rug as though nudging Rowan forward. His shift today was meant to be uneventful: routine patrol, corridor oversight, ceremonial escort if needed. The palace's senior advisor, Benedict Hale, was preparing for a briefing later with Queen Camilla, King Charles, and the Prince of Wales. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Not yet. Rowan adjusted the radio on his belt, though it rarely crackled with anything more than check-ins and protocol confirmations. "Captain Alden, beginning East Wing rotation," he murmured into the receiver. "Copy. Report any irregularities," came the response, the static smoothing into silence. Irregularities. Rowan almost smiled. The palace prided itself on order, ceremonial, rigid, traditional. Yet beneath the velvet and marble, Rowan knew a truth every seasoned guard eventually learned. The calmest mornings often preceded the gravest upheavals. He continued down the polished corridor, each step measured. He passed portraits of the late Queen Elizabeth II, of Charles in his younger days, of Princess Anne in ceremonial uniform, her gaze as sharp in oil paint as in person. Rowan admired her. Secretly, she understood discipline more than anyone else in the family. Turning a corner, he encountered a maid adjusting a vase on a pedestal. She offered a polite nod. Rowan responded with the subtle tilt of his head customary for guards on duty. A day like any other. But something tugged at him, an unease so faint it felt more instinct than thought. It was in the way the corridor lights flickered a moment too long, or how a door near the advisory chambers sat slightly open, though it was always kept shut. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it was everything. Rowan approached the door carefully, ensuring his footsteps made no unnecessary sound. The brass plaque read, "Strategic Advisory Office, Benedict Hale's Domain." Hale was known for his meticulous nature, his carefully tailored suits, and his role as one of the monarchy's most trusted confidants. He had served since the late Queen's time and was considered irreplaceable. Rowan placed a hand on the edge of the door, nudged it gently. Inside, the room was dark except for a thin ribbon of light falling across the long wooden table. Nothing seemed disturbed. No papers scattered. No objects displaced. A simple oversight, perhaps. A staff member forgetting to close it fully. Yet Rowan couldn't shake the prickle between his shoulders. He stepped back, closed the door quietly, and resumed his patrol. As he crossed into the grand gallery, the palace began to wake. Distant footsteps of attendants, soft voices of secretaries preparing documents, the rustling sweep of a page turning somewhere. Doors opened. Carts rolled. Keys jingled. The sun finally pierced the high windows, lighting the mosaic floor with fragments of gold. Rowan inhaled, grounding himself. Today would be calm. It had to be. Yet, as he neared the central staircase, a cold echo rippled down the hall, a faint whisper, impossible to decipher, drifting like smoke from behind one of the chamber doors. Rowan froze, listening. Silence. Then another whisper so soft, so fleeting, Rowan wondered if his mind had conjured it. He wasn't meant to investigate. Not yet. Not without cause. But something subtle, unsettling was beginning, and Rowan sensed it. The palace was preparing to shift. The morning stillness was cracking at the edges, letting the first slivers of unrest seep through. A storm was coming, and he was walking straight into it. The palace had fully awakened by the time Captain Rowan Alden reached the northern landing of the grand staircase. Sunlight now poured in through the tall glass panels, turning the marble steps into gleaming ribbons of ivory and gold. Servants hurried with trays, documents, freshly pressed garments. Guards rotated posts with the silent precision of a well-rehearsed orchestra. Everything appeared normal, mundane, predictable. And yet, Rowan couldn't shake the faint unease clinging to the edges of his thoughts. He stepped aside as Lady Margaret Elliston, Princess Charlotte's soft-spoken governess, hurried past with a stack of worn leather-bound books in her arms. Her cheeks were flushed, not from exertion, but from a sort of nervous hurry Rowan didn't usually associate with her. She was a calm presence in the palace, gentle as snowfall, always smiling, never stressed. "Good morning, Lady Margaret," Rowan said, lowering his voice to the respectful timbre expected of him. "Oh, Captain Alden," she startled, clutching the books closer to her chest. "Good morning. I didn't see you there." Her voice quivered, only slightly, but enough for Rowan to notice. "You're moving quickly," he observed. "Yes, well, Princess Charlotte has decided she suddenly wants to read all the stories about the old queens before her lessons. She was very insistent." Margaret forced a thin laugh. "You know how children can be." Rowan nodded. Princess Charlotte, 8 years old in this fictional monarchy, was curious by nature, radiantly bright, and deeply beloved by staff. If she requested something, it usually came from a place of genuine interest. But Margaret's hands trembled. A whisper of anxiety tightened her breath. "Is everything all right?" Rowan asked carefully. Her eyes darted over her shoulder toward the west corridor, where the advisory chambers were located. "Yes, everything is perfectly fine." She adjusted the top book awkwardly. "I'm just in a bit of a hurry." Before Rowan could ask more, she offered a shaky smile and rushed off, her footsteps echoing too quickly across the marble floor. Rowan watched her disappear around the corner. His instincts stirred again. First, the whispering voice. Now Margaret's unusual tension. It could be nothing. Palace routines had a way of creating odd moments, but Rowan had learned to trust the quiet warnings buried in the air. He continued down the hall, alert. A pair of junior staff members whispered near the portraits, glancing anxiously toward the west corridor. They straightened immediately when Rowan passed. A footman carrying tea stopped abruptly, as if he'd taken a wrong turn, and hurried back the way he came. A secretary clutching papers nearly collided with him, apologized far too profusely, and scurried off with her head down. Something had shifted. Rowan could feel the palace breathing differently. Shallow, hasty, unsettled. Following protocol, he approached the door of the Strategic Advisory Office again, the same one left open earlier. This time, it was tightly shut. Too tightly. Rowan brushed his fingers against the handle, feeling a faint vibration like someone had moved quickly behind it moments before. He stepped back. He wasn't authorized to enter without cause. Discipline mattered, but the air was heavy with murmurs, some unheard, some not yet spoken. And when Rowan turned the next corner, he almost collided with Advisor Benedict Hale himself. Hale jumped. "Captain Alden," he said sharply, straightening his suit jacket as though smoothing down his own unease. "You're rather quiet today." "Routine patrol, sir," Rowan replied. "Are you in need of assistance?" "No," Hale snapped. Too quickly. "No, everything is as it should be." Rowan studied him. The advisor's silvered hair looked slightly disheveled. His collar was misbuttoned, and his right hand clutched a small folded parchment, tight enough to crumple the edges. A strange detail for a man known for perfection. "Is the advisory briefing beginning early?" Rowan asked. Hale's eyes flicked toward the closed office door. "Not your concern." His tone was cold, but beneath it, Rowan detected strain, fear even. Hale turned abruptly and walked away, his footsteps quick, unsteady, almost panicked. Rowan stood motionless, pulse quiet but attentive. A disturbance was blooming beneath the palace's polished surface. Too many subtle signs, too many trembling hands, too many hurried glances toward that single corridor. Then, as if to confirm his instincts, a faint sound drifted from the far end of the hall. A whisper, not words this time, more like a hiss, urgent, warning. and abruptly cut off. Rowan's breath stilled. Something was happening inside those chambers. Something someone didn't want heard. And the storm he sensed earlier was no longer distant. It had begun. The West Corridor had always possessed a certain solemnity, lined with portraits of past monarchs whose watchful eyes followed every step. But today, as Captain Rowan Alden approached, the air felt colder, thicker somehow, as though the walls themselves were bracing for what they were about to witness. He moved carefully, boots striking quietly against the polished floor, trying to appear routine, even as tension curled through his veins like smoke. Every instinct in his body warned him that something significant and dangerous was unfolding behind one of these doors. He heard it first before he saw anything. A sharp whisper, then another, rising in intensity. Not the soft, hurried exchanges of staff, but the clipped, urgent tones of authority voices carrying command, frustration, fear. Rowan slowed his pace. His training dictated distance, neutrality, restraint. But his conscience pushed him forward, urging him to listen, to understand what tremor of danger was vibrating through the palace this morning. As he neared the partially ajar door of the antechamber leading to the advisory office, he recognized the first voice immediately, Queen Camilla's. Her tone was unmistakably sharpened, every word cutting through the quiet like a blade. "You were instructed to keep this matter strictly between us," she hissed, the anger barely contained. "Do you understand the gravity of your carelessness?" Rowan froze beside a pillar, breath held tight. Another voice answered, trembling, defensive, unmistakable. "Benedict Hale, Your Majesty," he whispered harshly. "I wasn't careless. I was followed. Someone has been listening to my movements all morning. I could feel it." "Listening?" Camilla's voice rose. Fury threaded through each syllable. "If this leaks, if he gets even a hint of what we discussed, everything will collapse. The king will demand answers I cannot give." Rowan felt his pulse hammer against his ribs. The queen's words were laden with threat and fear. Whatever Hale had been whispering earlier was far more serious than mere palace gossip. Hale tried to steady himself, but his panic was unmistakable. "I kept my voice down. I told no one. But the governess Margaret walked past at the wrong moment. I fear she overheard part of the conversation." Rowan's eyes widened. Margaret? The trembling hands, the hurried steps, the evasive behavior. It was suddenly clear she had heard something she wasn't meant to. Something dangerous enough to put her at the center of the queen's fury. Camilla's reply came like ice. "Find her. Before she speaks to anyone, especially Charlotte. The child repeats everything. If she carries this to her father, to the king." Her voice dropped, dark and unmistakably threatening. "We cannot allow that." Rowan's throat tightened, innocence threatened. An adult cornered, loyal staff placed in danger. His duty screamed for restraint, for distance. But his morality, his father's teachings, his grandfather's quiet wisdom pressed hard against his chest. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. Shield the innocent. And above all, prevent injustice within the walls, meant to uphold honor. The conversation inside escalated. Hale spoke in a frantic whisper. "Your Majesty, I'm not capable of confronting her. She trusts me if I frighten her. It will only make her speak sooner." "Then I will handle it," Camilla snapped. "If a governess cannot keep her ears shut, she can be dismissed. Quietly, without fuss. Dismissed." In this palace, that word rarely meant simply losing one's position. It meant exile, disgrace, silence. Lives were unraveled in a single order. Rowan felt his jaw lock. He needed to warn Margaret. He needed to ensure Princess Charlotte stayed far from whatever secret had ignited this fury. But guards interfering in internal royal disputes risked their positions, sometimes even their families' reputations. His father had warned him. "The palace rewards loyalty, Rowan, but it does not forgive disobedience." Yet Rowan could not stand idle. A sudden thump inside the room made him flinch. Camilla's voice grew louder, sharper. "If this becomes public, if even one whisper reaches the king, I will know exactly who is responsible." Rowan stepped back slowly, heart pounding. He needed to move before the queen stormed out and saw him within earshot. But as he turned to leave, another voice, softer and scared, drifted from the far end of the corridor. "Captain Alden?" "Rovanspun." Margaret Elliston stood there, pale as parchment, clutching the old storybooks against her chest. Her wide eyes glistened with fear. "Please," she whispered, voice breaking. I think I've heard something I should not have." Rowan's breath caught, and the weight of the palace, its secrets, its shadows, its storm descended upon them both. Margaret's voice trembled, as though the very air around her might shatter. Captain Rowan Alden stepped toward her slowly, every instinct heightened, every sense tuned to danger. The west corridor remained eerily still, yet Rowan felt eyes watching unseen but present, like the palace itself was leaning in to hear what would happen next. He motioned gently for Margaret to step away from the advisory chamber doors. "Walk with me," he murmured. "Keep your head down." Margaret obeyed immediately, clutching the books tight against her chest. Her breaths came too fast, too shallow. Rowan positioned himself slightly ahead of her, shielding her from any potential onlooker. His boots struck the marble in measured, authoritative steps, the rhythmic echo granting them a cover of normalcy. When they reached a quieter corner near the old servant's staircase, Rowan stopped. "Tell me exactly what you heard." Margaret swallowed hard. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I was walking past the antechamber, and the door was slightly open. I heard Advisor Hale whispering something about a document, something hidden. And then Queen Camilla said. She stopped, voice catching. Rowan lowered his tone. "What did she say?" Margaret lifted terrified eyes to his. "She said if the king discovered what was in that document, everything would fall apart. And then," her lip quivered, "then she said she'd deal with me if I repeated anything." A small sob escaped her. "Captain, I didn't even understand what the document was, but the way she spoke, I've never heard a queen sound like that." Rowan felt a chill wrap around his spine. A hidden document, a threat. Panic from both Camilla and Hale. Margaret's accidental knowledge had put her at the center of something dark, something dangerous within palace walls. Before he could respond, footsteps echoed sharply from the upper landing. Rowan straightened instantly. Advisor Benedict Hale appeared at the top of the staircase, glancing over the railing with wide, frantic eyes. He spotted them immediately. His expression hardened not with malice, but with fear of exposure. "Captain Alden," he called, forcing a strained politeness into his voice. "A word." Rowan shifted his stance subtly, placing himself between Hale and Margaret. "I'm in the middle of escorting the governess, sir." "It won't take long," Hale insisted, descending the stairs with uneven steps. His gaze flicked to Margaret, filled with a desperate warning. "We need to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings." Margaret shirked back, pressing against the stone wall. Rowan kept his posture firm. "The governess is under my supervision." Hale exhaled sharply, frustration breaking through his facade. "This is none of your concern, Captain." "With respect, sir," Rowan replied, voice level. "Anything involving the safety or well-being of palace staff is precisely my concern." Hale's jaw clenched. He looked over his shoulder nervously, as if expecting Queen Camilla herself to appear. "You don't understand what forces you're dealing with." "Then help me understand," Rowan said. But Hale shook his head fiercely. "I can't. Not here." At that moment, the corridor lights flickered an electrical stutter that wasn't common in the newer wing. The glow surged back, brighter than before, illuminating the tension carved across Hale's face. "Captain," Hale whispered, stepping closer. "She's furious. If she thinks the governess heard anything, she'll make sure Margaret is removed before the king's briefing this afternoon." "Removed," Rowan repeated, the weight of the word sinking like a stone. Hale looked away. "You know what that means." Rowan's heartbeat quickened. Somewhere deep within the palace, a heavy door slammed, its echo rolling through the corridors like thunder, and then a fierce, unmistakable voice. "Where is she?" Queen Camilla. Her footsteps struck the marble with commanding force, each step slicing through the quiet like a blade. Hale paled. Margaret let out a broken gasp. Rowan turned, eyes narrowing. As the queen swept into view, her expression a storm barely contained. Her diamond brooch glinted like ice. Her lips were pressed into a tight, thin line of fury. "Captain Alden," she said, her tone cold and dangerous. "I was not informed that the governess had been escorted anywhere." Rowan bowed his head. "Your Majesty." She appeared distressed. "I am ensuring her safety." Camilla's eyes flashed. Her safety is not your responsibility. With respect, Rowan replied evenly. It is while she is within these halls. The queen stepped forward, gaze piercing Margaret like a hawk eyeing prey. Governess Elliston, you and I have matters to discuss. Margaret trembled violently. Rowan subtly shifted again, blocking Camilla's line of advance. A silence fell, heavy, unmoving. Then slowly, deliberately, Rowan reached for the door handle beside him. A door that led to the old records room. A door that had been sealed for years. But now, it was slightly open. A draft swept through, carrying the scent of old parchment and something else. Secrets. Camilla's eyes widened, and Rowan realized the queen was not the only one hiding something. Something or someone was inside that forbidden room, watching, waiting. And as Rowan pushed the door wider, revealing a shadowy figure within, the palace storm erupted. The old records room breathed with the dust of decades, its shelves sagging under the weight of forgotten ledgers, sealed correspondence, and relics the palace preferred to keep buried. Captain Rowan Alden stepped through the doorway first, his hand instinctively drifting toward the hilt of the ceremonial sword at his side. The musty air curled around him like an ancient warning, and for a moment the world narrowed to the dim glow of hanging lamps flickering weakly above. Behind him, Queen Camilla halted abruptly. Her breath hitched. Rowan caught the faint tremor in her posture, the unmistakable sign that she had not expected this door to be open, let alone that someone might be inside. Advisor Benedict Hale hovered behind her, sweating through his collar, eyes darting between Rowan and the shadows. Margaret Elliston stood frozen just outside the threshold, pale as chalk. Rowan took one step further, eyes adjusting, sweeping across the rows of sagging shelves. Papers rustled, barely audible. A presence shifted deeper in the room. Then a voice emerged, a low, controlled whisper. You weren't supposed to find this place open. Rowan's muscles tightened. The figure stepped out from between two towering shelves, the dim light catching the edge of a familiar face. Prince William, the heir himself. His expression was carved from stone, stern and unreadable, but his eyes burned with the unmistakable heat of contained fury. Rowan's mind raced. Why was the Prince of Wales here? Why hiding in the shadows of a sealed room? Behind Rowan, Camilla stiffened. William, she snapped, attempting to sound authoritative, though the faltering edge in her voice betrayed her. You have no reason to be in this room. William ignored her entirely, his gaze fixed solely on Rowan. Captain, he said quietly, step inside fully. Close the door behind you. Rowan hesitated. Your Royal Highness. Now, there was no anger in his tone, but the weight of command was absolute. Rowan motioned for Margaret to stay back. She obeyed instantly. Then he pulled the heavy wooden door shut, sealing himself, Camilla, Hale, and the prince within the dimly lit chamber. The latch clicked, echoing like a final judge's gavel. William moved toward the central table, covered in old parchment rolls and cracked leather folders. He placed a hand over a sealed envelope stamped with the crest of the late queen. His voice lowered. This is what all the whispering has been about. Camilla's breath sharpened. William, don't. But he continued. A document written by grandmother. Instructions regarding succession, responsibilities, and, his eyes narrowed at Camilla, protections against manipulation within the family. Camilla's face drained of color. Rowan glanced between them, pulse pounding. Hale shifted anxiously, gripping his hands together. William slid the envelope closer to Rowan. Captain Alden, you should hear this, he said. You're one of the few people in this building who still honors duty without bending to power. Rowan stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. Your Royal Highness, with respect, guards are not permitted. I'm permitting it, William said sharply, because this concerns the safety of everyone in this palace. Camilla stepped forward, voice trembling with controlled rage. You are overstepping, William. No, he said, turning to her slowly. You overstepped when you ordered Hale to conceal this document, and when you threatened the governess for hearing whispers. His gaze sharpened, and when you tried to keep the king in the dark. A heavy silence settled. Camilla's lips thinned. You know nothing of the pressures I'm under. William's voice turned icy. Endangering staff is not pressure. It's cruelty! Margaret let out a quiet sob outside the door. Hale finally broke. Your Royal Highness, please understand, I never meant for any harm. I only... William raised a hand, silencing him. Then he looked at Rowan again. Captain, your next steps will decide how far this goes. Rowan felt the weight of the moment settle onto his shoulders like a mantle of iron. His duty had always been clear. His loyalty had always been firm. But this was no longer about protocol. It was about right and wrong, truth and deception, innocence and power. Your Royal Highness, Rowan said slowly, what would you have me do? William took a deep breath, the kind a man takes when crossing a point of no return. I want the king to see this document before anyone else, he said. And I want you to deliver it. Camilla inhaled sharply. Absolutely not. William turned, eyes blazing. If you stand in the way of this, the consequences will be catastrophic. The lamps flickered again. The room darkened. The air shifted. Rowan reached for the envelope. His fingers brushed the royal seal, and the loud bang shook the corridor outside, followed by frantic footsteps racing toward the door. Rowan froze. Camilla gasped. William's eyes narrowed. Someone was coming. Someone who knew exactly what lay inside this room. And they were coming fast. The true storm had only just begun.